It is 6:33 on a Monday as we get the week started. A cool week ahead, at least the next couple of days. So almost seems like you might want a jacket when you leave the house tomorrow morning if we're down in the 50s. But part of the big news of the day is Sergeant Bo Bergdahl going back to active duty today, returning to work, and he's now going to be living on a military base. Meanwhile, the investigation against him, looking at what happened and how he ended up being a captor, or actually I'd say POW, of the Taliban for about 5 years, continues. Brian Bouffard is a criminal defense attorney in military court-martials. He's a former U.S. Navy JAG lieutenant commander. The website to find Brian is jagdefender.com, jagdefender.com. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Michael, thanks for having me.
How many cases are you typically handling at one time now, would you say?
Oh, wow. It varies, but usually between 30 and 50.
30 and 50. Are you traveling all over the country to deal with these cases? Or?
I am, and those aren't all military cases. Some of those are civilian cases, but yeah, I travel quite a bit.
In the military cases, which do you prefer to work on, the military or civilian cases?
I really enjoy military cases a lot more. I enjoy the collegiality of it, and I always feel an obligation to help out service members. They're good people.
Do you approach the process in a very different way, or about the same when you're dealing with military versus civilian cases?
Well, there's comparatively fewer military cases, and as a result, we're oftentimes able to do a lot more pretrial work, motions practice, and things like that. So from a purely practice law standpoint, it's a lot more intellectual on the military side than it sometimes is on the civilian side.
Really, on the civilian side, less intellectual.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, actually.
So less pretrial work. It just feels like you just have to jump in and get started with it. You're saying?
No, well, that's what they try and force you to do, and it's always important as a defense counsel to resist that. Everybody deserves the very best they can possibly get out of me, but it's just a lot easier to provide that in the military context, just because it's not quite so much like drinking out of a fire hose like civilian criminal practice can be.
Really, it's a much more patience. I mean, how long does a typical military case last then, would you say?
It varies. I would say if a case is charged on January 1st, we're probably in trial on that case by May.
Okay, and in a civilian trial, you're going within a month or two, or?
Oh no, on the civilian side, it could be years. Actually, before you get to trial.
So it's actually longer on the civilian side.
Yeah, the lifestyle of a case tends to be a little longer on the civilian side.
So Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, first of all, the fact that he's returning to active duty rather than leaving the military, what do you make of that to begin with?
Well, he's still a soldier. He's still on active duty and owes us some work, and they're going to get some work out of him now. The fact that he is the media is calling it, he's going to be going back to active duty. He's never left active duty. He's just not been performing any job functions while he's been in the reintegration process. And what this tells us is that process is going well enough that his doctors and the mental health folks there have said, yeah, you're mentally cleared to work a little bit, but I would say that the chances of them giving him a rifle are basically zero, and he's certainly not going to be put back in a redeployment cycle. I imagine he's going to be working in the company office doing admin paperwork for a while. Does
this give you any indication of whether they're going to seriously pursue a case against him now that they've put him back in business?
No, this development here really has nothing whatsoever to do with whether or not he's going to be charged criminally. That's going to be a decision that's made after the investigating officer finishes his administrative investigation, and probably if he thinks that there's criminal liability there, which it seems like there may be, then they're going to turn that over to Army CID, and they're going to take the ball and run with that at that point.
And I'm sure you've dealt with many soldiers living on a military base with an ongoing case. In this one, so high profile, what do you think it's going to be like for him to be living on the base itself?
Well, it's probably been a little tough for him as he's been exposed to more and more people and more media exposure. There's not a lot of people who are willing to sit back and say, look, you're innocent until proven guilty, and kind of just sort of judge the facts as they come out appropriately. I mean, it's real easy to take a look at what we think we know so far and to kind of judge this man in the court of public opinion, and we kind of have to try to tap the brakes on that.
Okay, but in the military world, the soldiers you talk to, your own views on it, is the consensus a negative one against him?
Everything that I have heard from the people who I really care about from a relevance standpoint, and those are the people who were there with him on that base in 2009 who can give testimony about what Sergeant Bergdahl was doing and what he was saying and all the important stuff to determine whether he committed an offense. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen anything that isn't just uniformly negative on that, and that's why, you know, I think that there's a decent chance that this case is actually going to make it to trial if the political folks in charge, by which I mean the White House, if they allow that to happen.
So does a guy like him, Sergeant Bergdahl, is he likely going to be shunned while he's on the base as he's working and so on?
I would imagine that there are some folks who are going to shun him. You know, there are a few things worse that you can do in a combat zone than leave your buddies and not be there to have their back. And in fact, in a case like this, you know, if he left of his own accord, they sent people out after him, and some of those people were wounded and some of those people were killed. And that's not the kind of thing that it's easy for people to overlook.
Do you think he was given a choice then to return to active duty or leave, or how do you think it worked out that they brought him back into working?
You know, honestly, I bet he wasn't given a choice. I mean, he's a soldier. He owes us duty day, and he's gonna provide it as long as he's physically and mentally able to do it. And this indicates to me that it's been determined that he is. So
investigators had said that they're not going to begin looking deeply into this until he's out of rehab and so on. So what is going to happen now? Are they going to begin questioning him directly now that he's on active duty?
Well, again, he's never left active duty.
Right,
so,
but now that he's back, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they've been taking it seriously as far as doing the investigation. What they haven't been able to do is try to talk to him directly. And either now or probably in the fairly near future, his doctors and the reintegration team is going to say, yeah, you know, you're to the investigating officer, you're free to talk with Sergeant Bergdahl if he wants to talk with you. And now Sergeant Bergdahl has a right against self-incrimination, just like we all have, and he may elect to say, no, I'm not going to give any information to the investigator. Is
he going to be working with a JAG officer as soon as the questioning begins, or what's the process on that?
That's a great question. If he exercises his right to remain silent, he will probably be hooked up with an active duty judge advocate. From a pragmatic standpoint, it would have been in his best interest for him to have legal counsel right from the get-go. I mean, there are certain things that I would have tried to do if it were my case that might have tried to short-circuit the entire prosecution process, and I bet he has not spoken with any legal counsel at this point.
What makes you say that?
Well, there's just nothing that has triggered that procedurally where the government has to provide one. In other words, he hasn't been charged, he hasn't been questioned, at least not questioned in this kind of a context.
Well, let me ask you this. In a military context, if a defendant like him decides not to cooperate and will not answer questions, does that work against him when it comes to a military jury?
A jury never hears about that. If the law is working the way it should, it is just the same way in the military as it is in the civilian world, and that is anything you say can be used against you, but if you exercise your right to remain silent, that cannot be commented upon by the prosecution. So if that's what he does, and if the system works the way it's supposed to, and not monkeyed with by higher authority trying to commit unlawful command influence, the jury would never hear about that.
And how, when a case is this high profile, how do you get anyone in the military that is not familiar with the details of the case?
There's nothing about necessarily being familiar with, at least with media reports on the case. There's nothing about that per se disqualifies you. The question is, in light of everything that you may have heard about this particular case, are we all confident that you as a juror can be fair and impartial? And that would be the nature of the questioning when and if this case got to trial. But you're right. I mean, to call out fair jurors or fair court members in the context of a very high-profile, media-rich case, that can be difficult. So your view at this point is, do you think we'll see a case against him? To me, that is entirely up to the powers that be in Washington, D.C. If for whatever political reason President Obama or the Department of Defense decides that it would not be in their best interest politically to prosecute him, then there will be no prosecution.
Well, but that's way up the ladder. Aren't decisions made much lower down on cases?
Well, they are, and you're right. By no means does every case go up to the president for his personal approval, but you have to remember that the president is the commander-in-chief, and his wishes are made known to his generals. And if this case is going to go anywhere, at some point it's going to reach the desk of a commanding general. And if the word coming down is we don't want him prosecuted,
right,
then he's not going to be prosecuted. If it works with the
have you seen that? Have you seen that before, where the president, his will kind of changes the direction of a case?
I haven't seen it happen with an actual sitting president, but I have seen it with very high-level commanders. And
they just have a personal interest in the case, or how is it explained why they choose to not pursue a case?
That's a great question, because with senior commanders, the politics are not always necessarily clear. They're not out in the media making statements and things like that. But it would be a problem if, for example, a lower level person decided that somebody would not be prosecuted, and then a senior person said, no, he is going to be prosecuted. That would act against a criminal accused and could potentially constitute unlawful command influence. But being lenient to somebody will not.
Gotcha. You're saying, though, if the word comes down from a senior general not to proceed, then the case will absolutely not go forward?
A criminal case would not go forward if the senior leadership does not want it to.
Just like that.
What I just foresee,
is that done through some kind of a backdoor channel, that message, or is it just a straight-up command?
It would probably be, well, it could be either way, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, the president or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Army could just, make clear, from a policy perspective, we think Sergeant Bergdahl has been through enough. Whatever he may have done can be handled administratively, but we do not want to see a prosecution.
Okay, from the morale standpoint, do you view this as a case that should proceed for the sake of the military itself, or no?
There are some cases that need to be tried, and this may very well be one of those cases. Just from a morale perspective, people expect some sort of resolution, and I'm sure the families of those soldiers who were wounded and killed over there, their wishes are going to play very large in this, I would assume.
Brian Bouffard, criminal defense attorney and military court-martials. You can find him on his website, jagdefender.com. Jagdefender.com. Travels all over the country, civilian and military cases, a former U.S. Navy JAG lieutenant commander. Brian, as always, thank you.
Michael, thanks so much. Anytime.